Hey, little babe, you pretty girl. You pretty girl. I love you. Yeah, you can't sit with mom. No.
Are we doing it?
We are recording the podcast. Hey, gang, and welcome to another episode of Try Not to Curse. Today, I am joined by archaeologist and Professor Peter. Now, Peter, I understand right off the bat, I understand. You are not Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones and like Tomb Raider Laura Croft has given us some very wild impressions of archaeologists. Um, but for my listeners, for myself, can you explain the basically what you do under the title of archaeologist?
Yeah. But before I do though, I want to say s- so Indiana Jones isn't true, but some of the stereotypes are true.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
occasionally you run into some stuff. I had a colleague of mine, I had been teaching a class on cultural heritage preservation, and I invited a colleague of mine who's also an archaeologist to join us. And the students were like used to hearing my stories and stuff, and they thought, okay, this guy with his wacky stories. And I brought my colleague, and he's like, I've been in the military and I've been an archaeologist, and I've been shot at more times as an archaeologist than I have in the military.
Well, and well, what is the reason for that? Is it like other like treasure hunters or, people trying to come onto a site and illegally dig up, artifacts?
Yeah, yeah, it's actually it's a little bit of a couple things. Like some are very mundane and some are not. So he had had problems working where there were systematic looters. And
Okay.
people were even setting up traps, like kind of this is in the United States, in
Oh,
the
wow.
south middle, let's say, of the
Okay.
United States.
Okay.
And the people who were looting the sites would put up razor wire that you couldn't see in the dark because of the plants. They'd hang fish hooks at eye level and stuff.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, yeah. So his experience in the United States, it's just people who didn't want their looting operation to be
Just
interrupted.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
Sometimes it's as mundane as there are archaeological sites on farmland, and the farmers think you're poaching. The
Okay.
farmers think that you're there to take their in my case, one of the times I've been shot at, it was an orange orchard with a Bronze Age tomb in it, and the orange farmer just started shooting his shotgun.
Oh my God. How often are orange groves looted, I wonder? I mean, that's wild.
Well, I
I'm
grew up in Pennsylvania, and I told my wife Heather about this, and she didn't believe it until it was actually on the news happening in upstate New York. That I said, if
okay.
you come to visit where my family's from and you are going the wrong way on a road, don't turn around in someone's driveway because they're going to come out with a shotgun and ask you who you are.
Yes,
Right.
I have heard of that in certain states for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. People are very
So,
concerned about their property, which is
yeah, which also happens, in the Balkans and the Middle East and stuff too.
right. Well, I
So,
would think, because I watch those kind of like those treasure hunter shows where, especially the ones that are, they go out in the sea and the different reefs and stuff. I would think it would maybe be like competing governments trying to take ownership, something along those lines. But it's interesting to hear that even in the States, it seems like people have some wild ideas out there. That's crazy. So, have you worked overseas, or is your work primarily in the United States?
my focus of my work is actually in the Eastern Mediterranean. So
Okay.
Italy, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, that region. The Eastern Mediterranean, well, Italy's central, so sure. Um, but I've also, and it's really good I got into this before COVID, couple years before COVID. I also do maritime archaeology. So I've
Cool.
been working on shipwrecks, and
That's
I had
awesome.
been on a research trip. I was actually diving on a sunken ancient Roman city when COVID hit Italy. And I don't know if you remember how that happened, but Italy was one of the first countries to just lock down.
Yeah, yeah.
I got out shortly before it locked down. And when I came
Wow.
back to the States and people were like, "Where have you been?" I said Italy. They would take like three steps back. Um, but so my research trip was cut short by the pandemic.
Sure.
But luckily, since I had been doing diving archaeology, people weren't allowed to breathe on each other. And it's like, well, it's okay because we're all breathing out of our own canister, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Sure.
we all have a tank of air on our back, so
Sure.
we're not breathing the same air, right? So, so that was actually a kind of work that could continue
Okay.
when so many other things weren't allowed to continue. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So,
Well, so let's go back to all the way to the beginning
sorry.
before we get
Yeah,
too deep into
absolutely.
the
I
weeds
agree.
here. So you
Yeah.
said you grew up in Pennsylvania. Did you always have an interest? Like, were you one of those kids that would just kind of just dig in the dirt and oh, cool, this, were you interested in rocks initially, and then that kind of got you into, was it Indiana Jones maybe that you saw and said, hey, that sounds pretty fun? Like, what inspired you to go into this field?
I actually decided before Indiana Jones came out. What happened, this is kind of crazy, but I grew up in a family where I was by far the youngest person in the family. My parents were about 45 and 48 when they had me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I have a sister who's 20 years older to the day, who is actually a really big influence on me. She became an English professor.
Oh, cool.
But basically, I was into odd things. And also my brothers would spell words they didn't want me to know, like SODA and CANDY, so that they could talk in code. And I didn't want anybody getting anything past me. So when I was 3 years
Okay.
old, I demanded that my mom teach me how to read. And
Oh my gosh.
and
That's
she
great.
did. And then I just started reading everything because I had siblings in college, so I'd, read their textbooks and stuff. So I have a picture of me when I'm 3 years old in a sandbox. I have a mummy in the sand and G.I. Joe and Spider-Man with little shovels digging
Okay.
digging out the
That's
mummy.
awesome.
But my first memory of telling my mom that that's what I was going to do is I had this book called My Little Pictionary, and it had pictures and it had words. And the word archaeologist, it had a person holding a skull. And I always
Okay.
loved skulls. Skulls are pretty cool, right? So I
Yeah.
just got
Yeah.
skulls are awesome, right? So it was a guy dusting off his skull, and I said, Mom, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up. That or a knight, right?
Okay. Hey,
Yeah,
you
so there
know,
was always like a competing thing for a while, like an archaeologist or a knight when I was very young, an archaeologist or a ninja when I was just a little bit older, right? I thought about doing psychology by the time I was in high school, and I'm like, well, if you're a psychologist, your patients could have an emergency or something. If the ancient Greeks and Romans call me up in the middle of the night, there are bigger problems, right?
sure.
So,
We uncovered the wrong thing. We opened the wrong
right,
box.
right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
sure.
So,
Wild.
yeah, so I want to get back to the first question you asked because I kind of glossed over it because of the Indiana Jones thing. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to, yeah, most things are not like Indiana Jones, but sometimes stuff happens. Um, but archaeology is the study of the past through material remains. And it can be the very distant past, like prehistoric things, but particularly the human past. So it's not
Right.
paleontology, where you're
Right.
studying dinosaurs and mammoths and stuff like that. Particularly the human past, it can be very deep in the prehistoric past, or it could be things that happened relatively recently. One of the professors at Brown, when September 11th, 2001 happened, used archaeological techniques to excavate the Twin Towers site and try to identify remains that were found. So that became
Sure.
disaster archaeology, was
Wow.
something that wasn't really the very beginning of it, but that's when it became uh, more widespread as
Sure.
something people
Sure.
knew about. So.
Yeah. My mom always likes to say, there wasn't a regular garbage pickup, hundreds of years ago. So what did people do? They just dug a hole and this pot broke. We have no use for it. So put it in the hole and, bury it up. And now we're just collecting everybody's trash and finding it fascinating. And when in fact,
Yeah, that's exactly right. We spend a lot of time going through people's trash, and that's why pottery is so important because, sorry, I want to pontificate for a second
oh, please.
about archaeologists and pottery, because the way I express it to my students is if you have a friend that can look at someone's outfit and say, "You look so 2018," Or if you can recognize like, oh, that's a 1998 Nissan driving by. If you have the ability to identify cars or fashion or anything like that, that's the same technique that we
Sure.
use most of the time. Everybody thinks we're carbon dating everything, and unless you're in deep prehistory, we often have a lot of better options than carbon dating because carbon dating is really expensive and it gives you, as a scientific technique, it gives you a wide range. So a lot
Yeah.
of times if we used a chemical dating system, we would get an answer that was like, well, duh, glad we spent like $5,000 for that answer that we already knew.
Right, right, right,
Right?
right.
So,
Right.
so we use that same kind of technique that somebody who understands cars can tell you what year that car is. Um, but pottery changed because people were always making it, just like fashion. Every year there's new fashion, every year there's new cars. So pottery, people are always making it because they're always breaking it.
Sure, right,
And
sure.
the other half of that is that the broken pieces last for a very long time,
Right.
except in New England.
Okay.
I've heard we have, well, from a former student who's now a colleague of mine who works on North American stuff. Um, she has told me that the soil in New England is very acidic,
Mm,
and even pottery doesn't last, too many hundreds of years in the soil
yeah.
around here.
Yeah.
So.
That okay, that's really interesting. And now what was your first like hands-on experience? Was it during school? Was it prior? Like again, were you always like a curious kid? Were you that kid that had the metal detector out on the weekends in people's fields or
Well, I had to wait a really long time for it because I grew up in basically mining country,
okay,
and I was the youngest of seven kids of an insurance salesman and a school teacher. So there was not a giant budget, to travel
sure.
around the world and stuff as I
Sure.
was growing up. So I went to college actually on a scholarship for swimming and water polo. And to
Oh
give you
wow.
Well, to give you a sense, I had never played water polo before, but my high school swim team was state champions several times in a row and national champions a couple times. We didn't even have a swimming pool. We actually
Okay.
used the Catholic Youth Center swimming pool because our school couldn't afford to have a swimming pool, and they just
Okay.
let us use the Catholic Youth Center. So, which was actually a terrible pool, which is part of the secret to our success because we had to get really good. And when we went to anybody else's pool, it was like, oh, our water feels like we're swimming in pudding. This feels like we're swimming in air.
That's so wild.
So,
That's wild.
so I went to college on a swimming scholarship, and then they recruited me for water polo while I was there. But I studied ancient languages. I
Okay.
guess I should stop for 1 second. So I teach the students I teach at an art school. I often ask them, "Hey, because they need to know about ancient art and how it was made and stuff." So I'll often ask them, well, I will say, I guess your parents were on board because this is a very expensive school. So I guess your parents were okay with you being an artist.
Right.
But um, my parents wanted me to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And I also was quite an incredible heavy metal guitar shredder as a high school student.
Okay.
And so my parents said, go to college. And I said, I'm just going to go to New York with my guitar and I'm going to make it with my guitar. And they're like, no, you're going to go to college. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to go be a guitarist, college, rock star. And then finally, I'm like, okay, but you can't pick what I study. I study what I want.
Sure. Okay.
So I got a degree in ancient languages and literature. And then I got a major in that. I also wanted a minor in ancient civilizations, but they said that's stupid. These are the same department. You can't have a major and a minor in the same department. So they
All
said
right. Okay.
they said, okay, if you got a second major, we'll give you a minor. So I went and got a
Okay.
second major in art history and then came back for my minor in ancient civ. And that is how I got a full fellowship to Brown University for my PhD.
Wild.
And
Wow.
um, yeah, because I guess my grades were pretty good and my GREs were very good. So,
Well, I was gonna say you
so
seem like an overachiever and clearly multifaceted, multi-talented. That's awesome.
Well, I kind of spread my efforts around a little too much. I'm pretty sure I could do more, but I'm interested in a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Uh,
fair.
so so basically I had not had money to do the stuff I wanted to do. So my first experience was actually Brown sending me to Greece. And then in my second year at Brown, they just said, "Why don't you just go spend a whole year in Greece? Just go for the year." And there's a program at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens that people joke it's like archaeological boot camp
Okay.
because they make you hike forever and ever and ever up mountains and stuff to visit sites that tourists would never visit because unless you're trained, there's nothing for you to see there, if that makes
Oh,
sense. Like
okay.
it takes
Yep.
a trained eye to notice even what's there. So
Okay.
so yeah, I was out on that. Usually universities sent people who were a little further along, but I guess Brown had confidence in me right from the beginning and they're like,
Oh,
you'll make
that's
us look
cool.
good even though you're only like 23, 24. Go ahead. Uh so and then I got a Fulbright to go back a couple of years later and finish my dissertation, which
That's
I did pretty
great.
quickly, and I wish I took longer because getting grants to live in Greece was awesome. And I wish I had not been so studious. I wish I just kind of hung out there a little bit more and was a little slower getting my work done because it was great.
Sure. That's awesome.
Um, but yeah, all my experience came after college because there were just no financial means for me to travel and stuff before I had an Ivy League university paying for it. You
Sure.
know,
Right.
basically,
Fair.
yeah,
Fair.
yeah. So
And
yeah.
so we always, again, in films and TV depictions, we always see, digs are in the middle of a desert or in the deep in the middle of the jungle. I mean, like you said, in Greece, you're going up these hills, these mountaintops that nobody else is ever going to traverse. It's a pain in the butt to get up there, and for all intents and purposes, there's really nothing up there to see. But is there a reason that they don't ever really show? I mean, do you only go into areas that are basically untraveled? Like, or do you can you dig in popular areas? I mean, I would imagine it's harder. You probably need certain kind of permits and city ordinances and permissions and all that kind of thing. But I would imagine you need that regardless. But
Mhm.
is do you prefer one or another, or is there a reason that we look in one type of area as opposed to some others?
Well, we go where the stuff is, and sometimes you can actually identify if you know how a culture looked at their landscape, you can identify sites that haven't been identified. So
Okay.
I want to add something to that in a second, but I'm going to say I have worked in the city of Athens, right? You know, major city. I worked on the Athenian Acropolis. I have worked in, you know, on tops of hills where the nearest settlement has a couple hundred people and a castle, you know, right? And
Wow.
then that was kind of out. And I've worked shipwrecks in Newport, Rhode Island, you know, because there's
Okay.
a whole heck of a lot of shipwrecks there. So, including from the Revolutionary War.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, sometimes we work in isolated places, sometimes not others. If I can, I just want to tell you this hilarious story. It happened
Please.
before I was born, but it's about how some really important archaeological sites were found. There was a this so we're talking about the Etruscans, this civilization that before the Romans flourished in Italy, they were the dominant civilization in Italy before the Romans rose up and basically conquered and assimilated them.
Yeah.
Um so there were two professors out drinking one night. One's an Italian, Ranuccio Bianchi Bandinelli. He's called the Red Count because he was a communist and he was born to a noble family and he split his family noble lands among the people.
Oh, wow.
Um, uh, which is ironic because he later ended up working for the Getty Museum in California. Um, but anyway, and then there's this Kyle Phillips, who's a professor at Bryn Mawr College in mainline Philadelphia area. And they were having a drink one night, and I always tell the students, like, don't drink and drive, kids. but they drank a bunch of wine and they decided, hey, let's drive around the countryside and find new sites to excavate. So
Okay.
they took this one inebriated drive around central and northern Italy. Uh, and this is how the story was told to me by the director of one of the excavations they found. And and that they identified something like 2 dozen new sites to excavate. And then Bianchi Bandinelli said, well, I'm the Italian, so I get first pick. This is my country. And he picked the site of Montalcino. And we're pretty sure the reason he picked that is because I don't know if you know Italian wine, but Brunello di Montalcino is the
Okay.
full-bodied Tuscan red. It's considered one of the best wines of Italy, and we
Okay.
think he probably chose it because they had the best wine. After a couple decades of excavation, he found like a small number of artifacts, but not much. And the American said, "Well, there's this place that's called the Hill of the Civilization. I think I'd like to look at the Hill of the Civilization, and on it there's a plateau called the Plain of the Treasure, and there's a hole there called the Ditch of the Treasure, where 100 years ago supposedly a farmer dug up a golden sculpture. So I'm going to look there."
Okay. Yeah. Sounds pretty
And
good. Yeah.
immediately found some of the most significant buildings that from that period that are known to this day. This was in the 60s, and that
Wow.
Americans have been excavating that same site since the 60s, and still there's so much to see.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Is there still stuff to find? I mean, again, it feels like between both paleontologists and archaeologists, like how are we still discovering? Have we not traversed every corner of this world and the land, the sea? Like it's just fascinating to me that we're still coming up with new things. And in fact, I just had a friend the other day that said, "Oh no, no, there are still civilizations we know nothing about." And I had made the point to him. I said, "Yeah, I feel like the average Joe, and I don't know if it's the American educational system or what, but I feel like the average Joe always kind of believes that things like begin like the dinosaurs were like the first forms of life. Whereas I'm like, well, there's billions of years before that. There could have been other civilizations. But I mean, how deep do we have to go? How vast, how much do we have to search to are we're just always going to be uncovering things, do you think?
Oh, that's a big question. I now have about three answers.
Okay,
Right?
great.
Right.
Great.
So the first one is due to the education system and due to the fact that archaeologists as a field have not been very good at contacting the public. We uh career-wise, our incentives are for talking to each other, to talking to other experts, and that's how you advance in your career. There's not really traditionally like showing things to the public and educating the public at large
Yeah.
has not been rewarded
Yeah.
in the way
Right.
scientific
Yeah, you
careers
guys
work,
you
right?
guys aren't showing up on the cover of Rolling Stone or Time magazine or, yeah,
So that leaves a void, and the problem is there are people who have no training, and the problem is not that they have no training because you don't need a degree to do this,
sure.
but they also have no respect for any kind of proper logic or methods and ignore any evidence that they don't like. And they get, for example, their own Netflix shows and stuff in which they're selling they're selling people a fantasy, and they're
Mm,
making money that scholars who actually know the stuff, we don't make that much money. We don't have
right.
giant Netflix shows and stuff.
Right.
Um, uh, Although a friend of mine who is a producer of a very popular probably the most popular show on the History Channel, tried to set me up with my own show some years back. Um, he just knew me and he from before, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you need your own show."
Yeah.
And we put it together. We did the conceptualization of it, and we made what's called a sizzle reel, which
Okay,
is
yep, yep.
how you shop shows to channels.
Yeah,
And the so we didn't get a hit. What I wanted is it would be an adventurous show, but at the end unlike all these other shows, you would actually learn something that is real, right?
Yeah,
Right? Like
can't have that.
I would have this idea of like, here's what we're going to learn at the end, and then plan the episode around that, you know. And
Sure.
the channels didn't bite, but one made a show that took our exact episode lists and made it with a comedian.
I'm
And
I think I know
yeah,
that show.
it
Okay. Yep.
it didn't even finish a whole season because let's just say the comedian is not one of the funnier comedians.
Okay,
It's
sure.
fine. It's easy to be good on a daily show
Yeah.
because daily show's so funny. But anyway,
Right.
I'm not going to say anything to get me in trouble. That's a limit of what I'm going to say. But
Sure.
literally, we had the episodes planned, and that show was taking them pretty much in the same order that our sizzle reel put them out.
Of course.
Uh,
Right.
2 years after that, or something like that. So,
Terrible.
so anyway, there are charlatans who are basically promoting these ideas, and the ideas that they're promoting about aliens and lost civilizations, everything, they're largely based on an old model of what's called hyperdiffusionism. Sorry, I know it's a fancy word, but
Okay.
hyperdiffusionism is the wrong idea that there was a master civilization that taught everyone else, right?
Okay.
So
I've not heard of that. Okay.
yeah, so for a lot of and it gets you into some pretty scary things if you delve into it. So before there were ancient aliens, there was Atlantis. And I actually have a TED talk on Atlantis.
Oh, cool.
The main point is, sorry, I'm going to spoil it for, I'm like, I'm an underwater archaeologist. I'm an archaeologist who works on ancient Greek and Roman stuff. And then my lecture is, if we saw people in a couple hundred years trying to find the Emerald City of Oz, we would laugh at them.
Sure. Oh,
Ancient Greeks and
yes.
Romans, when they read the story of Atlantis, it was very clear that it was not meant to be a real history. And the people who try to tell you that it's a real history never encourage you to read the whole dialogues
Okay.
where Socrates, these are Platonic dialogues. Socrates is Plato's teacher, so he uses Socrates as the main character. And Socrates says, "Does anybody have a story about how a powerful civilization could fall to vice, and how a very comparatively small civilization could protect their virtue?" And it's basically a war story between Atlantis, which is made up and like super powerful. They lose their way and they become power hungry and they try to conquer the rest of the world. And Athens, little tiny Athens at that point, stands up to them.
Okay.
uh, so when people are making a show that they want you to be like, oh, look, Atlantis, they never tell you that it's a parable in which a non-existent version of prehistoric Athens is the hero. And to look for Atlantis is about as sensible as reading Aesop's fables and looking for talking foxes. Right?
Right.
It's
Sure. Sure.
the same level of things, right? Like it's like
Sure.
I want to find the grave of the prodigal son, right?
Yeah. Well,
Right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
that was going to be that was the first thing that came to mind. Like, do we believe in the Holy Grail? Is that are we finding that anytime soon? Or, because again, growing up, I grew up Unitarian Universalist. But my mother grew up Catholic. My mother has always strongly believed that Jesus was a real person. Um, but it's interesting to me because I've not that I'm a skeptic, but it's one of those, yeah, I could believe that he's a real person, sure, but I also do kind of get enthralled in the idea of like, well, where's the proof? Where's the facts? Where are the artifacts in particular? How do we know this is, so do you feel kind of the same way as like Atlantis? Is that we're not finding the Holy Grail, there is no Holy Grail and that kind of thing.
Yeah, actually, so I want to go and say the Ark of the Covenant. There are archaeologists who study the Ark of the Covenant, as in
Okay.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right,
There
right.
are pictures in synagogues of the Ark of the Covenant, ancient pictures. So there are lots of people who find, archaeologists finding they're excavating ancient synagogues and they find this picture of the Ark of the Covenant, and they go do a bunch of research on the Ark of the Covenant, which, you know, likely there was a real thing because we got lots of pictures. Now, the Holy Grail, I don't think there's probably a Holy Grail, but it's interesting you mention this because to talk about Jesus, right? It's just maybe I shouldn't, but but
I feel like if
there's a good
anyone,
point
you'd be
there,
the
which is
person to ask. So,
so I work a lot of my work involved epigraphy, which is study of inscriptions. And the
okay,
ancient Greeks kept records of all sorts of things on stone, like when people graduated from their military training, which was basically like high school, like a male who was born to a citizen family would, at the end of their education, have 2 years of military service, and then they would be considered adults and they could vote and stuff like that. So we have
okay,
graduation lists for these guys, right?
that's
So when
interesting.
you find like a gravestone or an offering, you have to cross list all the names to find that, where else that same person is mentioned. Sometimes you find the same name and you have to decide, is this the same person?
Right.
Does the chronology match up? It was made harder by the fact that ancient Greeks, for example, you'll see where I'm going in a second. Ancient Greeks, for example, tend to name the first son for their grandfather, so the names kind
Okay.
of alternate through
Right.
history. Um, but the ancient Romans also kept ridiculous amounts of records, and what we don't have is any record other than the Gospels that mentions Jesus.
Okay.
There is one of those charlatan guys I was talking about that will tell you he has it, but like let's leave that away.
Sure.
Um
Yeah.
so but it is the scholarly consensus that Jesus must have been a real person because the amount of following he was able to get in a matter of a century or two, we could hoax somebody with the internet, especially now with AI, right?
Right.
Right.
Right. Of
But
course.
with
Yeah.
like mass communication and internet, we can make up hoax people.
Yeah.
Uh, it would be really hard during the Roman Empire to make up people that didn't exist and convince a lot of people
Right.
that they actually did. So
Yeah.
even though, yeah,
When I think about him, I always kind of liken him to like a Martin Luther King, or like, he was a very electrifying figure that just commanded attention and had some radical ideas. But again, you think about where the civilization was at the time, they were kind of looking for something new. They were looking for hope, and he had a message that just happened to, you know, relate to a lot of folks and speak to a lot of people. And you know like you said, all we had at that time was scrolls and text, and so we're just going to keep making copies of the same thing because people seem to like it, and
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
that's how we got here. I at least appreciate that, like I said, my mother and I are kind of along or on the right track in believing that, yeah, he did exist. But yeah, no Holy Grail, gang. Sorry about that.
yeah. You can find, I'm sure you can find someone that says, there was no Jesus or something who works in the field, but as a general consensus among the field, methodologically, we just think it's very hard to get there if there wasn't a real person to
Sure,
start with. But
sure.
another point is from the point of view of the Roman government, and I'm not talking about like Pontius Pilate, whatever, but from the point of view of the Roman government at large, there were a lot of people that were leading small groups around, small religious groups, that there were purported miraculous events. If you look in the Acts of the Apostles, there's Simon Magus, right? As in Magus, as in magus, as in magician, right? Simon the
Okay,
magician. And there's even a Roman emperor who the Romans kept altars to their family gods. And early on, it became a thing you could do to put some of your favorite people, like celebrities. Uh, we think of them as putting like their favorite philosophers and stuff, but I know people are probably putting their favorite gladiators and
sure,
chariot
sure.
racers.
Yeah,
People
absolutely.
have little altars to their
Yeah,
sports
your
stuff
heroes.
now, I think,
Yeah.
right? Um, and there was one Roman emperor who collected statues of wizards in his lararium, his household gods shrine, and he had Jesus in there along with Alexander the Great and a few other people that are only known in history for being wizards. So,
Interesting. Okay.
so
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
So
That's wild.
there's a really
Um,
good book by Thomas Matthews called Clash of Gods. Well, most of it's really good. There's one chapter I really can't get behind, but
okay.
but the general argument of the book is that what how does Christianity succeed when there's actually a bunch of these groups like the Simon Magus group and stuff, all of these at the same time. And his argument is that basically Christian art tried to make the point that our miracles are better than your miracles, right? And yeah, so anyway, I might write a paper someday about Jesus miracles in early Christian art, even though it's a little later than stuff I work on, but I have some ideas.
Sure, you should.
Print someday.
Well, so let's go back to when you're out in the field, when on either assignment or like do you ever just go out there for funsies? Like you just take a sabbatical and say, "Hey, I'm gonna go, dig around this spot that I've always had an interest in." Do you get to do things like that?
Well, um, permitting requirements, depending on the country, but most countries, permitting requirements are pretty strict. You have
Okay.
to, and you were asking about, is there more to be found before, and this relates to this. A lot of archaeologically rich countries are like, please don't dig up anything new. We have no more space. The museums are full to the brim. The storage of the museums are full to the brim. In Greece and Italy, there are museums that just they have to keep a lot of their artifacts outdoors in the yard because there just
Right.
isn't enough indoor
Right,
space.
or back in storage because they don't have enough display space. I mean, I know we have that even here with our own museums, like in New York, for example, that a lot of stuff is in storage that they just kind of rotate every couple of years. But wouldn't you think that they would want that kind of attention to bring in tourism, to bring in more interest? And again, there's more to discover out there, surely. So wouldn't they want to be on the forefront of that? I mean, again, I can understand, but
Yeah.
but also my question to you as well was, when you do find things, I'm assuming you have to turn them into the government. It's not any you're not sneaking things home in your bag on the plane. You unfortunately, even though through all of your hard effort and work, you have to then turn that stuff over. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, that's what we signed up for. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good.
So
Okay.
so the it's funny because Indiana Jones was always it belongs in a museum. Do you know that meme that has Anakin Skywalker and Princess Padme from Star Wars? And he says something and she looks at him to clarify and he doesn't say anything. It's a popular Star Wars meme.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's one where he goes, "It belongs in a museum," and Padme goes, "In its country of origin, right?" And he just stares at her,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
Because
Right.
in the old days, there were agreements. Like if you go to Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, you can find the second best collection of Old Kingdom of Egyptian art in the world after Egypt itself,
Yeah.
because at the time they excavated Giza, they would set up these permits that allowed the sponsoring country to take, I think it was around 20% neighborhood, although the individual objects had to be signed off on by a government official.
Okay.
So Boston has an incredible Egyptian collection for the Old Kingdom because they were involved in the Giza excavations and they got to keep some stuff, but that is by and large a thing of the past. The big excavations that used to be carried out were the result of massive global uh, financial inequality.
Sure.
And we still have global financial inequality, but I guess it's progress that it's not on that level anymore. It used to be like a German guy like Heinrich Schliemann. Well, he was like maybe the richest industrialist of his time, but he basically hired a whole village to work for him. He's like, hey, everybody who works in this village, everybody who lives in this village, you now work for me. I've got money, and a lot of these governments, like the French and German government, put a lot of money into scholarly research. So France went into the town of Delphi in Greece, like the Delphic Oracle, and told everybody who lived on the archaeological site, no, you got to move. We're going to dig this up. You got to move, right? And of course, Mussolini in Italy would push people out of their uh, where they lived to excavate stuff because his connection to the Roman Empire was he wanted to be a Roman emperor and look like a Roman emperor. So, and I didn't know this because I am not old enough to know this, but some of the generation that taught me said that for a number of decades, for about 3 or 4 decades after World War II, people didn't want to study the Roman Empire because it was
Interesting.
so marred by the association with the fascists. So,
Oh, okay. That's really because now I feel like that's like the number one civilization that always gets talked about, that always gets lauded for their innovation and the way that they've changed civilization simply by conquering the majority of it at the time. Um, so that's really interesting to hear. Um, I almost wonder if some of these countries, like, could there be like some kind of exchange program or like a loaner type program? Like, let us still come and excavate, but like we'll take it back and put it in our museum and educate our people on this stuff. Like, because like I said, I feel there's way more out there that needs to be uncovered, and it's a shame that it's kind of sometimes they tell you no thanks, but like, don't you want to know where you came from? Don't you want to know the origin of your people? And
well,
so that's
I guess
interesting.
getting back to the having enough place to put things, it becomes an ethical question,
Right.
scientific ethics, that if we're digging up stuff and there's no place to take care of it, we're just destroying it, right? Like,
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's a
so
fair point.
people
Yeah.
are always asking me, "Are you going to raise shipwrecks?" And I'm like, "Oh, heck no."
Yeah.
I can name two examples of incredibly important shipwrecks that were raised: the Mary Rose in England and the Vasa in Sweden, and the museums that were built. So it was an incredible cost to raise them, but keeping the conditions in the museums just to keep them from falling apart,
Right.
multi-million dollars every year just for the climate control,
Right.
for
Right.
those sites. So it's not something we do because the minute you take like a piece of wet wood out of the water, it immediately starts to disintegrate unless you go through the proper conservation. So if
Right.
archaeologists are pulling up stuff and there's no place to take care of them, um, then that is an ethical problem, So and we also and I remember once I was talking to my friend who was a molecular biologist. Actually, he was working in the DNA aspect of molecular biology, and we were talking about scientific ethics. And I was like, well, there's part of the scientific method that is difficult for archaeology, which is the scientific method involves repeating experiments. But once we dig something up, it's gone, and there's no other, we don't have a backup. We can't try that
Right.
experiment again.
Yeah.
And and I was talking to him about that, and he's like, "Well, I think you're a great scientist because you have ethics that we don't have in genetic biology." Right? In
Right.
other words, maybe should people be cloning sheep? I don't know, right? Like that's something that I mean that's water way under the bridge, but all the
Right.
stuff about cloning and gene editing and all the various things that could happen, sometimes people apparently push it to the point that other people aren't so sure. Whereas in archaeological ethics, for example, we always leave parts of a site unexcavated because future archaeologists will have better technology and better
Sure.
techniques, and they will
Ways
be
to
able to learn things that,
preserve.
yeah. So we save it
Yeah.
for the future archaeologists who can do better than we can based on the technology available to them.
Yeah, that's fair for sure. That's really fascinating. Um, how has social media, if at all, helped you guys because again, like you said, there's a lot of these charlatans out there. Lord knows I get sucked into those, the metal detector guys on TikTok and things like that, even though I know half the time the stuff they're planting is either fake or a lot of times they get called out because like, oh, that box you found is mysteriously clean for being buried under 6 feet of dirt for 100 years or whatever. But is has it helped you guys kind of get the true message out there and educate people at all, or is that not a tool that you use?
Now, this is a funny week for you to ask about it, which
Okay.
I'll tell you why in a second. But by and large, archaeology has not leveraged social media, but those other folks have completely taken it over.
Yeah.
And I am of the school, like the generation before me was fine with archaeologists just talk to archaeologists, but I am of the belief that we have an ethical duty to talk to the public, right?
Yeah.
And because there's all sorts of things, like a lot of the things, like I was talking about ancient aliens in Atlantis, most of that actually comes back to racism in the end. It is mostly, when people started to believe in Atlantis in a big way was during European colonization, when Europeans came to North and South America and said, "Where's the white people who built these pyramids?" Because they would not credit
Right.
the indigenous people with the capabilities of doing
Right.
those things. And
Or how we
there's shows
believe that
on.
Jesus is a white man with blue eyes, but he grew up in the desert. Like, okay, sure.
Yeah, there have recently been shows on like major cable networks that are basically just that racism, and that's pretty much what I'm not going to name names. I've already been in
Sure.
fights with those people. But anyway, not that I'm against fighting with them. I just have other work to do
No,
these
it's
days.
yeah,
Like I
yeah.
had a
There's
lot more
priorities. Yeah,
I had a lot more time for it when I was younger. Uh,
fair,
so
fair.
so going back some years ago, I decided to try to leverage social media for archaeological education, and I actually made my own site. It has amazing branding, because you met Heather.
Yep.
Heather drew the logo for me and everything.
Nice,
It's on my scuba tanks. It used to be on my phone case till I got a magnetic phone case. It
nice.
just I have t-shirts, everything. And the problem is for someone my age is I was debunking stuff on the internet before social media got to the point where it is, right?
Mm, yeah.
And then the last thing I tried was Facebook, which I'm told now is old people, right? Like my students are like, Facebook, that's for old people, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on it.
Right?
I still like it. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I'm also
So
old
so
now,
up
I
until
guess.
a year
So,
or two ago, I had a Facebook page that was just kind of archaeological news and reports and
oh, that's
debunking.
cool.
And I would show the news, but I'm like, here's my personal experience in relation to this to help you interpret what you might want to take away from this article instead of
Sure.
because the articles themselves are written by people who if they have degrees are usually in like journalism or English or something, and they sometimes they write the things in a way that's very misleading or
Okay.
honestly kind of wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get back to my main point in a second, but my favorite thing is every time anybody finds anything in underwater archaeology, no matter how bland or like and okay, it's exciting to scientists. I'm not saying bland, but so there's prehistoric sites that are basically like stone tools and some bones and some fire pits and stuff like that. But every
Yeah.
time there's a story about anything underwater, the people who make the clickbait will use these pictures of underwater pyramids, and you know where they are? They're in Atlantis Resort in the Bahamas in a pool for scuba divers to swim around
Great.
these and they're small. They're about like 6 feet by 6 feet, but they look like these massive pyramids because you photograph them underwater. And that's
Right.
that's the most typical picture that's on the cover of these stories. But
Great.
I did need to get back to the main point, which I'll remember in a second, of social media, which is so there is a younger generation that this is why I think it's funny that you talked to me about it this week because about last year or 2 years ago, okay. let's go back like 3 years. I was
Sure.
on a panel called Science Communication and Social Media, and I was talking about how important this is. And then a couple years later, we had that same panel again. And I said, I don't know if I can do it anymore because we not only have all the people trying to make a buck off people thinking about Atlantis and aliens and stuff, and really they make a lot of money off their TV shows and selling books and videos and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we not only have that, but we have the Russian troll farms. And the Russian troll farms, so let's say the government of Russia would like to rebuild the USSR,
Mhm.
and major actions they have done point exactly in that direction. We've known that for a really long time.
Right.
Um, what if you're someone like Vladimir Putin? What you want to do is you don't want the rest of the world to be united. You want everybody, you don't want a European Union or a United States that is all on the same page. You want them to be infighting so
Sure.
that they can't do anything if you just decide to expand, right? And the strategy has been clear for a long time. So what these Russian troll farms do is they drum up, old ethnic hatred between like Greeks and Turks and Albanians and Greeks. And it's not all about the Greeks, but I work a lot on Greek stuff, so I
Sure.
see
Sure.
all the people trying to like make make people hate each other more, right?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
there's even some old theories, like the thing that was really a straw that kind of broke the camel's back for me was in the 1980s there was this Russian mathematician who knows nothing about archaeology, but he made up this idea that history is all fake. There's no such thing as history. It was all made up by the Vatican to cover up for the fact that the Russians conquered everything and did conquered everyone and did everything. So according to this, the pyramids of Giza, Russian, right? Shark Cathedral, Russian, right? The
Okay.
Great Zimbabwe, Russian. The Chicago World's Fairgrounds, Russian. Until very recently, everything was Russian, and the Russians did everything. And so there are bots out there promoting this idea, and
Sure.
it's there are people who have started believing it. And to me, I was like, and the other thing is modern social media, you have to spend a lot of time comments
Yeah.
and basically
The
like
internet is mean. I tell people all the time, the internet is mean.
the stuff I teach will get me fighting against Nazis. And I have
Sure.
no problem with that,
Sure.
but it's less fun on the internet than it is in person. Well, you can see what I look like, right? I used to go to a lot of punk shows, and that kind of stuff
Sure,
happened there,
sure.
the
Yeah.
punk
Well,
shows.
well, and again, it almost after a time it just feels like screaming into the void, right? Because
It is, yeah.
you're right. You're coming from an educated, logical place with hands-on experience of over decades. And these guys are like, well, Jimmy 25 has this great video that debunks everything that you just said. And it's like, wait, okay, what? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and how do you argue with that? How do you, how do
right.
you set that right? It's an
And
uphill battle for sure.
it's a difficult thing because the methods of archaeological reasoning that you don't have to have a PhD to be an archaeologist, but you have to use the methods, otherwise you're just making stuff up. So
Yeah.
the people who
Well,
just make stuff up reject the methods, and they say
well,
that they're meanies who won't let me in their club is basically
yeah.
their, yeah.
Well, but like you said, it also comes with an understanding and a moral obligation of, this is for educational purposes. This is not for me to get rich quick. And I think that's where the narrative has kind of always revolved around these kinds of things, right? And again, that's also why, it's so popular on TikTok, because everybody assumes that, oh, if I dig something up and I find it, it's going to be valuable, it's going to set me up for life. I just need that one thing to find in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
Whereas to your point, a lot of the stuff or to my mom's point even, a lot of the stuff you're finding is ancient trash. And
Yeah.
yes, you found a relic of a pot, but it's a shard of a pot. How much realistically can a shard of a pot really get you? You
Well,
know,
in a career, I find sculptures and jewelry and stuff like that.
sure,
Those are things that show up. Somebody just going to poke around, if you do it every day for a long time and you know exactly because you have the right methods, and we don't look at it as financially valuable. This is information about the past, right?
yeah,
But there is stuff that is spectacular. Um, if you just are somebody with a shovel and without the collected knowledge of people who've been doing this for uh a century and a half professionally. I mean, not I'm not that old, but there is about a century and a half of professional background
sure,
of knowing what to do. In the same way that if you practice medicine without a medical license, that's illegal. Are you hurting people? Well, it depends if you're doing it right or not, right?
right, yeah, yeah,
Right, right. And
yeah,
most people who don't have a medical license, the chances are probably not doing it right. So I
sure,
had a student wrote a paper with some really awful misinformation in it once, and I looked in their bibliography, and there was a book about the ancient Minoans by a medical doctor. And I said, well, you can use this book if next time you need surgery, come call me and I'll bring my trowel.
right, fair, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Um, but I want to just get to the climax of why I thought it was funny that you asked me this week, because next week um, there's a talk at my institution that I was just contacted, I think maybe because I have been doing this debunking and stuff for a long time, and I have that TED Talk and stuff. By the way, TED Talks are not a natural way to talk. They want you to memorize a script that is 15 minutes
sure,
long
yeah.
and then recite it from memory. And
Yeah, it's
people who
it's
are,
come it's become performative for it to a certain
yeah,
degree, for sure. Yeah.
I tell my students, like, if you are giving a public speech, don't have a whole full written script. Know what you're talking about and talk like a person, right?
Fair. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I was a little embarrassed by the whole memorization part of the TED Talk. Like sometimes you feel like you're in a second grade play, and the Easter Bunny,
Right.
right,
Right.
where the
Yeah.
words don't follow the same way.
Right.
Even though you
Yeah.
wrote them, it just doesn't come out natural if it's a
Of
rote
course.
memorization.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah. So there's this young archaeologist who contacted me, and next week he's talking at my institution, and he has the biggest archaeology channel on YouTube. I think it's something like 2.8 million followers on YouTube and
Wow.
slightly
Okay.
more than that on TikTok, I think. And
Okay.
uh, and what's really funny is I saw him when he was new. Like he's quite young. He is of a younger generation than I, but I saw him when he was maybe fresh out of college. I saw his channel because it was on my feed because of the kind of things I do. And I looked
Sure.
at it and I said, huh, that young man's, pretty good. He's going somewhere. And
Yeah.
now I see he's contacting me and he has the biggest archaeology channel on YouTube.
That's
And I think to
cool.
myself, I wish we had had these kinds of social media tools when I was young and had all the energy to do what he's doing.
Right. Fair.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
what I'm going to say to him when I see him is like, wow, you have the energy to deal with comments from Nazis 24/7. All the more power to you.
Yeah.
I like I I my energies are spread out through too many things to just make that my everyday all day fight. I'm still
Yeah.
willing. It's just that because of social media, these commenters can come into your life and
Right.
come into your living space
Right.
in a way that they couldn't before, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and social
and it's much
media
more
has
draining.
become a job in itself as well. So if
Yeah,
you, just like you said, if your interests are elsewhere, you don't want to, you can't dedicate that kind of time. It's not sustainable for somebody like that. So yeah, I give these younger kids a lot of credit for keeping up with it and building careers out of it. It's
we
pretty interesting. But at least, he seems, from what you're saying, it sounds like he's doing the right things, and he's at least helping
absolutely.
to educate people in the right way, and hopefully debunk some of these fake explorers on TikTok. So
Yeah.
that's really good. But as we get towards the end here, um, what is, from your years of experience, and again checking out things from different civilizations, learning the different languages, as you've said, how many different languages do you speak, or can you at least kind of recognize?
Oh, that's a tough one because when I was younger, they were fresher in my head.
Sure.
When I
Yeah,
when I
sure.
just learned things. So I
Yeah.
like to say I could probably read about 9 or 10 languages, several which are dead languages.
Yeah.
Um, and if I have to get in a conversation, not in English, I'd prefer it to be in Greek. Sometimes if I'm
Okay.
talking to someone not in Greek, but not in English and not in Greek, and I get nervous, it starts coming out in Greek because that's kind of the foreign language comfort zone for me.
Sure,
Although I
that's
only
fair.
learned it when I was 23, I didn't have any
Right.
resources to learn that. I learned ancient Greek in college, and it wasn't till I was in grad school, like we're sending you to Greece, that I learned modern, but I was there for about 3 years, so I feel pretty
Yeah.
good with that language. Now I should be good at Italian, but the problem is I took Spanish in high school,
Okay.
and Spanish and Italian are just close enough to one another. Like I can read them fine or listen to someone, but when it's time for me to speak, is the Spanish word going to come out or the Italian word? A lot of
Sure,
times they're so
sure,
similar that
sure.
the wrong one comes out. So I actually took a class in Italian over in Italy some years back, and I told them I apologize for my speaking. I know I probably sound like a child because I'm tripping over Spanish when I try to speak Italian, but I'm like, don't
Right.
worry, I will understand everything you say to me. I apologize if my
Right.
Italian is not what it should be, you know.
Right.
And for grad school, we had to prove that we could. I had to take 4 language exams for grad school, so that was German, French, Italian, and I don't remember if I took Latin or ancient Greek. Like I needed to know them both,
Wow.
but I had to take exams where you sit for 3 hours with a long passage and no dictionary. So
Wow. That's
yeah, it was
wild.
part of the doctoral exams.
Yeah.
And the reason I would have to learn German is because, for example, the German government has supported archaeology, so there are a lot of articles in German. So if
Okay.
if someone like wants to publish in archaeology and say they only speak English, they're gonna have somebody come around and slap them down that like this has already been said in German. Why don't you know
Okay.
that it's already been said in German?
Okay.
So and
That's very
also French,
interesting.
Italian. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
series of languages, and I have one important disclaimer, which is, this is for the type of archaeology I do, which is based in the Mediterranean. There are other types of archaeology that in U.S. universities usually fall into anthropology departments, and
Okay.
they have different sets of requirements for their education and stuff. But I went in through the ancient languages route, specializing in Mediterranean stuff. I
Okay.
I don't know how many ancient languages other than like Greek and Latin and Sanskrit you can take in American college as an undergraduate. I know Brown has Middle Egyptian.
That's cool.
I learned Middle Egyptian elsewhere, but I was told by one of the students in Middle Egyptian class, and this is maybe is not true now, this decades ago, he said, what you actually get really good is reading the professor's expression because you start translating something and you see him frowning and then you quickly change your translation. But
Oh my goodness.
yeah.
But that's really cool though. For anyone who might be interested in doing what you do, getting into the field, what advice do you have for them now, after all this time? And again, technology, I'm sure, has come a long way since you had started, and just taking away the couple of things that you've learned here or there. What's something that they should kind of keep in mind?
Okay, so the first thing is so I'm on the board of this underwater archaeology group, and the director, when she teaches classes to new people in the group, if they're college students, she says don't do it. Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if I'm 100% don't do it, but um I'm I guess I'm fine now, but I don't spend my money on new cars and stuff like that. You know,
Sure.
I'm driving a
Right. Right.
2010 car, and as long as it
Right.
keeps running, I'm gonna drive it till it's dead, and then I'm gonna
Yeah.
buy a new used car and then drive
Right.
that till that dies, you know.
Well, and
So
again, you said it wasn't really a making
it's
enterprise,
not,
and
yeah.
again, a lot of people think, oh, well, because I see these TikTokers and they're, they kind of, I think again, I think everybody believes that if I've dug it up and it's ancient, it's got to be worth a bunch, but you also forget the idea that, well, it actually belongs to that government. So it's not something that you
Yeah.
can just put in your pocket and walk off with and come, show up at a pawn shop and say, "Hey, what can you give me this
I-
for this ancient relic?"
And as an ethical rule, archaeologists don't put monetary values on things, but I think it's all right for me to say a lot of things that the general public thinks would be priceless are like, oh yeah, we've got like thousands of those. Yeah, whatever.
Right.
You know,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
like not that we're okay losing it. What we're most upset about is that someone has removed it from its context. I guess that's the most important thing I should say before we end, and then I'll finish that other question, is that the important thing in archaeology is the context. When you dig something out, you record the context. If you dig something out in an unprofessional way, you have destroyed all the information that comes with it. And
Sure.
really, the
Sure.
value of the stuff comes from the information. We're recording like layers of soil. We're recording exactly where it was found in relationship to other objects. There's a
Right.
whole lot of things that we do as a field. And the important ethical thing I mentioned about not pulling out things that you can't conserve, but the main thing is preserving context. And once we dig that out, there's no do-overs. The
Sure.
information is lost, right? So
Sure.
that's why archaeologists take a dim view of people poking around looking for things, because that thing which might have been worth a wealth of information, once removed from where it came from, it becomes just another one of those things that we've seen
Yeah.
lots of, and it's no
Right.
longer interesting, right?
Right.
So okay, so anyway, just on the advice for people who are looking to study archaeology, well, so I will not say don't study archaeology. I will say know what you're getting into. To be a professional archaeologist, people often come to me and say, I wanted to be an archaeologist growing up. And I try to not sound like a jerk, but I also want to say, but you didn't, right? And the reason is a small number of people go through with it because we make choices about what our life will be. You know,
Yeah.
I have friends that are like, how do you have all these crazy adventures? I'm like, because I picked that instead of money.
Right. Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. Um, so, um, but one of the pieces of advice the director of my group likes to give people who want to study archaeology, she's like, study organic chemistry and be a conservator, because there is money in being a conservator. Uh,
Okay.
because uh, that's a highly technical job. It's very much in demand. In the archaeology profession, there are a few places people work, governments, right? Which I have a lot of friends who work or at least worked as archaeologists at the National Park Service.
Okay.
Um, if I lived in Greece, I could be an archaeologist in the Greek Ministry of Culture, but if I were Greek, but I'm not Greek. So I can
Right.
go to Greece, I can do excavations, but I can't be part of the Greek government, if that makes sense, right?
Okay. Yep.
So if you want to excavate something not where you live, not where you're a citizen, you can't take that government route, right? Then there's academia, which is what I do. You know, the money comes from teaching college, right? And it's really quite fun sharing stuff with the students every year.
Sure.
I get a kick out of it. I don't like the parking. Um, and then a little bit museums, but then you also have to take sort of you don't have to, but you probably should take other specialized education in museology. Um, and there are contract archaeologists. One of my good friends, after grad school, he specialized in Greece, but then he became a contract archaeologist in Texas.
Okay.
And that is, you work for a company, and if somebody wants to build a skyscraper, they have to do a land survey to make sure that there's no like indigenous American
Right.
burial ground or something, right?
Right.
And in fact, the companies that hire you aren't always pleased with the results. Sometimes you
Of
find
course.
stuff
Right.
that
Of
they
course.
really wish you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that's its own thing. Again, without advanced degrees, it's not a great job without advanced degrees, just like you can't be a professor without advanced degrees in it. Um, the people with undergraduate degrees who do it at least used to refer to themselves as shovel bums. They just travel around from place to place and dig. And the conditions are often pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Academic archaeologists working in other countries, well, the conditions are in my part of the world hot because summer is the time when professors can arrange their research because we're
Sure.
teaching the rest of the year. So,
Yeah.
in Greece or Italy or Turkey in the summer, it can be quite hot. But
Right.
I'm not used to digging in through ice, right? Because that's not what I do. Although I did come up from a shipwreck once in a wetsuit and it was snowing.
Oh, wow.
When I got on the boat, it was snowing, and that was not great. So that's when
Yeah.
I bought a dry suit. It's not because I'm cold in the water that I got a dry suit. It's because
Right.
you have
Right.
to sit on the boat in the wind and snow until your next dive. And that day, I took off my wetsuit because I was going to die of hypothermia because it was
Sure.
snowing
Sure.
and I was in a wet wetsuit. I took it off, and then they're like, "Are you ready for your next dive?" I'm like, "Not today. I'm not putting on this icy wetsuit."
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I'm sure there's so many more questions. There's so much more I could ask you, but Peter, thank you so much for your time. I do really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Again, it's just, uh, again, there's a lot of stereotypes out there. There's a lot, like you said, shysters, charlatans, and I wanted to bring you on as the expert and kind of set the record straight a little bit. And I think we've definitely touched on some really interesting topics. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, gang, this was Peter, and we will catch you next time on Try Not to Curse. And that's it.